Good evening. Welcome back to Ponzinomics. I'm Alex.
Evening all, I'm Sam. Tonight we leave the world of finance and go to Silicon Valley, to a 19-year-old Stanford dropout who convinced some of the most powerful people in America that she had invented the future of medicine. She hadn't, but she convinced them long enough to raise $700 million, achieve a $9 billion valuation, and run blood tests on real patients that gave results so inaccurate they could have killed people.
Elizabeth Holmes, Theranos, the most audacious fraud in Silicon Valley history.
Let's go.
Elizabeth Holmes enrolled at Stanford University in 2002 to study chemical engineering. She was 19 years old. She had an idea, a device that could run comprehensive blood tests from a single drop of blood taken from a fingertip, rather than a full venous draw. Faster, cheaper, more accessible. If it worked, it would genuinely revolutionize medicine. Millions of people who avoided blood tests due to needle phobia could be tested easily. Early detection of diseases could save countless lives.
It's a good idea.
It was a genuinely good idea. The problem, and this is the central fact of the entire Theranos story, is that the technology to do it didn't exist. Fingerstick blood tests work for a small number of specific tests. For the comprehensive panels Theranos was claiming, hundreds of different diagnostics from one tiny drop of blood, the physics and chemistry were simply not there. This was not a case of technology that needed refinement. It was technology that was not possible.
She knew this.
That is what the evidence strongly suggests. Holmes dropped out of Stanford in 2003, used her university education fund from her parents to found the company, originally called Real-Time Cures, later renamed Theranos, combining therapy and diagnosis, and spent the next decade convincing people it worked anyway.
Real-Time Cures. She changed the name because people were apparently skeptical of the word cure. Not of the product, just the word.
The board she assembled is one of the most extraordinary in corporate history. George Shultz, former Secretary of State under Reagan. Henry Kissinger. William Perry, former Secretary of Defense. James Mattis, later Secretary of Defense under Trump. Various generals and admirals, politicians, former cabinet members.
Any doctors? Any laboratory scientists? Anyone who understood blood testing?
Not a single one. The average age of the board was reportedly 83.
83. The board overseeing a revolutionary blood testing company had an average age of 83 and no medical expertise between them.
They were there for gravitas, for access, for the appearance of legitimacy, which is exactly what they provided. Holmes also cultivated a very specific persona. She wore black turtlenecks. She spoke in a deliberately deep voice, which former colleagues later said was affected, not natural. She idolized Steve Jobs and consciously modeled herself on him.
Black turtleneck, visionary genius, disruptive technology, reality distortion field. We've seen this before.
Silicon Valley has a type, and Holmes played it perfectly. She was on the cover of Fortune, Forbes, Time. She was called the next Steve Jobs, the first female self-made billionaire. Her paper net worth reached $4.5 billion.
$4.5 billion for technology that didn't work.
Here is what was actually happening in the Theranos laboratories. The device Holmes had built, called Edison, which should tell you everything about her self-image, could not run the tests as claimed. So when patients came in for blood tests, Theranos was running them on conventional machines, Siemens machines, standard laboratory equipment, hidden from view, behind a curtain effectively.
They were using normal machines and pretending it was their own technology.
Not only that, the conventional machines were designed for full venous blood draws. Theranos was collecting only a tiny fingerstick sample, then diluting it, running it through machines not designed for diluted samples, getting results that were, at best, unreliable, at worst, actively dangerous.
Dangerous how?
One specific example, the warfarin test. Warfarin is a blood-thinning medication. Getting the dosage right is critical. Too little, and you risk blood clots. Too much, and you risk severe bleeding. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, the federal body that oversees laboratory standards, found that Theranos' warfarin test posed, in their exact words, immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. People could have received incorrect dosing information for a drug where incorrect dosing can kill you.
And they were running these tests on real patients.
Through Walgreens pharmacy locations, 40 of them across the country. Real patients, real results, going to real doctors who made real medical decisions based on them.
How many tests?
The company eventually voided 2 years of test results from their Edison devices. The number of patients affected ran to hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands of people received blood test results that may have been wrong and made medical decisions on that basis.
That is the part of this story that separates it from everything else we cover on this show. In every other episode, the victims lost money. Here, the victims potentially lost something else entirely.
And the investors?
The investors included some of the most sophisticated names in venture capital and private equity. Rupert Murdoch put in $125 million. The DeVos family, of Amway and Betsy DeVos fame, invested. Walgreens invested. Safeway invested $350 million to retrofit 800 store locations with Theranos clinics that never properly worked. Total raised, approximately $700 million.
700 million. From people who presumably had access to due diligence teams.
Holmes was notoriously secretive about the technology. She cited intellectual property protection, trade secrets, competitors. This is a Silicon Valley tradition. Move fast, be secretive, disrupt first, and explain later. In most cases, that's aggressive but legitimate. In Theranos, it was a mechanism to prevent anyone from discovering the technology didn't work.
And the board? All those former Secretaries of State and Defense?
George Shultz's own grandson worked at Theranos, Tyler Shultz. He became increasingly concerned about what he was seeing, the inaccurate results, the corner cutting, the culture of secrecy and fear. He tried to raise concerns internally, was shut down, went to regulators under a pseudonym, eventually became a source for the Wall Street Journal investigation.
And his grandfather?
Initially sided with Holmes over his own grandson. George Shultz, former Secretary of State, chose to believe Elizabeth Holmes rather than Tyler Shultz. He later acknowledged he'd been wrong.
A man chose the fraudster over his own family because the fraudster was convincing and his grandson was inconvenient.
The Wall Street Journal investigation was led by John Carreyrou. He published his first major piece in October 2015. Holmes's response was to deny everything, send lawyers after sources, and attempt to have mentions of the WSJ coverage removed from Wikipedia, which is a violation of Wikipedia's terms of use.
She tried to edit Wikipedia to remove coverage of a fraud investigation into her company.
She also invited Joe Biden, then Vice President of the United States, to tour the facility to boost credibility, and built a fake laboratory specifically for the visit, a Potemkin lab, real equipment, staged to look operational, concealing the actual conditions.
A fake lab for the Vice President of the United States, who praised what he saw because he was looking at a film set.
Once Careyrou's reporting began, the regulatory and legal avalanche was rapid. CMS revoked Theranos' laboratory certification. Walgreens terminated the partnership and sued for damages. The SEC filed fraud charges. Criminal indictments followed in 2018.
And Sunny Balwani?
Ramesh Balwani, known as Sunny, was Theranos' president and chief operating officer. He was also, for years, Holmes' secret romantic partner, 19 years her senior. The relationship was hidden from investors, the board, and the public throughout the period when Holmes was projecting the image of a lone visionary genius.
She hid a relationship with her COO, who was nearly 20 years older than her, while raising $700 million from people who thought they understood the company they were investing in.
Material information, one might argue. Holmes was tried separately from Balwani. During her trial, she became pregnant and gave birth, which some observers noted as a sympathy tactic, though that has never been proven. She was convicted on 4 counts of fraud in January 2022 and sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison.
And Balwani?
Convicted on all 12 counts. Sentenced to 12 years and 11 months. He received a longer sentence than Holmes. Make of that what you will.
And the patients? The hundreds of thousands of people who receive potentially inaccurate results?
Arizona refunded $4.65 million to residents who had received Theranos tests. Every resident, regardless of whether their specific results had been voided. For the broader population of patients across all states, the legal proceedings were complex and the compensation partial at best. And some of the medical decisions made on the basis of false results, we will never fully know the consequences of those.
That's the thing that stays with me about this one. Every other episode, someone borrowed against a future that didn't exist, money was lost, companies collapsed. That's terrible. But here, the thing being sold wasn't a financial product. It was a medical result. And when you give someone a false medical result, the consequences aren't always financial. Sometimes they're permanent.
The board full of generals and former cabinet members who provided gravitas without scrutiny. The investors who were too impressed with the turtleneck and the story to ask if the machine worked. The regulators who took years to catch something that turned out to be obvious once anyone looked. The journalist who looked. The grandson who tried to tell the truth and was abandoned by his own family for it.
Silicon Valley in miniature. Move fast, break things. In this case, the things being broken were people's health.
She's currently appealing her conviction and sentence. Balwani is in federal prison. And the Theranos patents, which were bought by a SoftBank subsidiary after the company collapsed, were subsequently used to sue companies making COVID-19 tests, claiming the tests violated Theranos' intellectual property. The ghost of a fraud that never worked, threatening to block tests that actually did.
The patents of a fake blood test company were used to try to stop real blood tests during a pandemic.
Yes.
I've got nothing. That's just the world we live in.
What did we learn?
That visionary genius is not a category of person. It's a performance, and a very effective one. That boards exist to provide oversight, not decoration, and a board of 83-year-old former statesmen with no medical knowledge provided the latter. That secrecy in the name of intellectual property can be a mechanism to hide the fact that there's nothing to protect. And that when the thing being sold is not a financial product, but a medical result, the harm is not always recoverable.
Next episode, we go back to football, to Leeds United. A club that spent its way to the edge of the Champions League, borrowed against a future that never arrived, and nearly destroyed 100 years of history in the process. Peter Ridsdale, Goldfish with Agents, and the phrase that explains everything, living the dream.
This time it's different, right?
It never is.